welcome to this week's review of My Hero Academia Vigilantes. This week I'm reviewing Volume 6 as a whole, and we kick off this review as we always do with these reviews by talking about the positives and the headline positives, all the big things I enjoyed over the course of this volume, and I love just how wild and crazy this particular volume gets. I like the way it's able to balance its tone, I think it does that rather well, and I like what it sets up for the coming volumes. As you'll know from watching my reviews over the past few weeks, I really love just how strange and weird this particular volume gets. It's just... it pivots from just kind of normal My Hero Academia level strangeness to stuff that is just gross and kind of icky in the light of a few episodes, but I really do like the way and just how bloody eccentric this entire volume has been, and it's definitely one of my main highlights of this one, and is one of the things I will almost always remember about this particular volume. It is something that I feel has been largely absent from the main series after a certain point, and that the sheer wildness and randomness of quirks just started to fade off into the background as the series went along. Oh sure, you might get an episode or so where someone in the background has gun barrels for fingers, or someone that has like a fish-like face, but that would be just about it, and more often than not you maybe get someone who's just like blue or green or something like that, and that's the extent of it. Whereas earlier on in My Hero Academia you'd have a lot more wild and crazy looking characters. You have people that are made of wood, you'd have someone that looks like a dinosaur, either in a body that's shaped like a washing machine or something like that, or having a vacuum for an arm, and as time went by those kind of weird designs faded off, and after a certain point everything looked rather standard for your typical anime characters with wild hair and weird coloured eyes and that kind of stuff, and just this sheer out now, oh my god, quirks can be almost anything, and some people can look really bloody strange with them, is something that, well, it's something that was, I think, got increasingly absent from the main series, possibly because of a changing tone or a desire to just focus in on the main cast and the main action, but regardless, that isn't a problem here, because over the course of this volume, we get to some really wild and crazy stuff. We pretty much kick this whole thing off with giant killer vegetables, giant killer tofu, statues that may have been brought to life, or just weird mutant things that kind of look like statues. We have squid monsters and a guy with Thomas the Tank Engine for a head. There is more insane creativity over the course of these 9 episodes than it feels like they've been for the past 5 seasons in the anime, and I presume by extension that amount of time within the manga. Now, in fairness, these moments of just wild, insane creativity are largely done for the sake of throwaway gags, just little bits to set up for later on. Oh, we've got All Might and he needs to make his entrance into these things. What's he gonna fight? I don't know, let's have him fighting a giant corn cob. Oh, Crawler needs to do something at the start of this episode. Who's he fighting? He's fighting someone that looks like a really useful engine. And that stuff, yeah, it works, it's fine, it's enjoyable, I like a lot of it. And yes, it is done for the sake of throwaway gags, but when the throwaway gags are just this wild, this random, this crazy, I really do dig it. I've always had a kind of surreal sense of humour. Not abstract, but surreal, and I know that's whatever, that's a whole other thing, but I like the fact it's able to go down this path, that it's able to act with a greater sense of creative confidence than it feels that the main series really has. This really does go into more of the minutiae of just how strange quirks can be and how random they can seem to manifest within people to just such wild standards. Oh sure, the character design here is not some of the best I've seen in anime and manga more generally. It would be a toss-up to say whether I like the first series of One Punch Man or this in terms of the creativity here, but at least within its own neighbourhood, within its own world, I like what we end up seeing here, and it ends up continuing this theme, this tone, this idea that here we are in the side story, we are seeing the stuff that we don't often get to see in the main series, so we are getting a lot more of this the crazy, insane creativity here, which again, I really do dig. And again, it may just be for the sake of a short throwaway gag, just something to set the tone for the episode coming up, or act as a mild palate cleanser from somewhat more serious in the previous episode, but still, it shows a level of just ingenuity here that I really do enjoy, and I have to take my hat off to if I was the kind of person to wear a hat. Oh sure, we do get stuff that's a little more grotty, a little bit more gross than probably we've seen in quite a while, at least not since the bit where the bees flew out of that woman's, you know. You have the whole moment in the little Mixer mini arc where we have the moment with the vomit covered towel, which How the hell they're going to do that in the anime, I don't know, providing, of course, even gets that far, but we'll soon see. That's a problem for them. That's just something for them, but, you know, in fairness, these little bits, they're just moments. They're just smaller slices of a larger story, smaller segments of a larger episode, and whilst they are just moments, they're still effective for what they are, because they are done in a way which feels measured, which might sound insane to say, given that we're talking about episodes in which someone can go past with a head shaped like Thomas the Tank Engine, but they are measured in their execution. They don't go overboard. None of these moments stay around too long. They don't do this kind of thing too often, and none of it ever really feels as though it's overstaying its welcome. Maybe with the exception of the giant squid monster guy, but that design was kind of generic enough that it didn't look especially eccentric, but some of the stuff is wilder and crazier with the giant killer vegetables. Oh sure, that's a little gag that something's done for the sake of maybe 3 or 4 panels, then we move on. And the fact it is just short, these sudden bursts of insanity is what makes it a lot more effective, and what makes these moments stand out in the wider volume itself, and makes them a lot more memorable. This isn't to say that there's anything otherwise forgettable within this volume. This is not to say that I'm going to get beyond this and think, oh god, what happened here, or just shrug my shoulders into the content of it, but apart from these moments, the more important scenes are still memorable. But if it weren't for these moments where All Might is fighting a tofu monster, or Crawler is running away from a giant Thomas the Tank Engine guy, there wouldn't be much here otherwise to remember, again, aside from those important moments, which, yeah, they're important. They're moving on the story and the stuff that we'll discuss shortly, but still, I like what we see here, and I really hope that we continue to see more of this as this season goes along, or rather this series goes along. And I'd like to see this something that's expanded upon when the anime comes out, because, look, look, this might be a controversial thing to say, but I think that when this gets adapted into its anime form, I think that there's going to be a few episodes of filler needed here and there to just balance stuff out and extend stuff out. And if that happens, I'd like a little bit more creativity here, where we're having these strange and screwy monsters and bad guys, rather than just our characters bumming about and not really doing much of a muchness, but that's a discussion for a whole other time. I think that this volume as a whole entity largely balances its tone rather well. I know that as far as, like, positive things to say are concerned, that sounds rather non-committal, but look, I think that with this particular volume, it is able to balance these sillier, crazy, more eccentric moments rather well in comparison to the more calmer, darker and serious moments. I say it balances the tone largely well because I think that for the most part, these dark, more dramatic moments are a minority of this overall volume, but that is something I'll discuss later on. But like I say, it's able to shift tone and shift gear in a way that feels gradual and a lot more managed than in certain other TV shows and other comics book series and other manga and other anime series. We're able to get this gradual just slowing down of pace. We're able to almost get this cool down period after we've had Crawler running away from this big crazy monster guy. We then have a little bit where we're just kind of slowing it down, so there's never this feeling of there being a snap. There is never this moment where it feels like we're going to be thrown into some kind of juxtaposition, where we've gone from guy with Thomas the Tank Engine head to almost immediately dark, serious, scary thing that just feels kind of out of place in comparison to everything else. And this means that we can have episodes where Crawler is goofing around and trying to be a hero, and then we have a scene after that which pushes the story. Or we can have a moment where we're building out this world, as was the case with the giant mantis man, and then pivot into having a bit of a crazy action sequence thereafter, or just before that. And again, without ever feeling as though there's this sudden jerk, this certain almost tonal whiplash, and we go from something that is serious to something screwy, or from something screwy into something serious. I will admit as this, how it actually does this cooling down does get kind of repetitive after a certain moment, as the methodology to go from these wilder moments into somewhat more serious is just to pivot to a scene with Eraserhead having his meetings with the guys in the recycle hopper shop, which I think that whole sequence of events, that whole mechanism is starting to overstay its welcome, but as far as a method to change gear, to change tone, I think that it works well to get us across that we can go from a scene where Crawler is trying his best to learn how to use this new power, to then we move into something a lot more serious thereafter, and we use that as a bridge. I think we need more bridges. I think that we need to do other things aside from just having Eraserhead overstaying his welcome in the local recycling stop, but still, I think it still works, and I think that it is a great mechanism, or at least a decent enough mechanism, that it allows us to go from stuff that is silly to more character-driven and fun, or something that goes from something that is into something that is silly and wacky into something that is dark and more mysterious and serious, but still fun in and of itself. I will just say very briefly, and this isn't something that I've written into my script, but something I do think is worth noting is I do like the humour we get within this particular volume. I'm not going to lean too long onto this because it's the kind of stuff I've discussed in the past, and it's not past, and it is not something that I've scripted, but I do appreciate the fact that a lot of the humour that is residing within this particular volume, much like Vigilantes as a whole entity, is very character driven. It's very much about the characters themselves and who they are as people, their personality traits, their foibles, their nature of them as people, more so than is necessary slapstick or something that feels out of place with them. The fact that we get this sequence in the Mixer arc where Crawler is just totally oblivious to anybody having an interest in him whatsoever beyond just Pop Step, I think is a fun bit. The stuff that we get earlier in the volume where he's trying to use this new power that he uses to shoot this little beam of energy out, and he's trying to do it in such a way that doesn't get him arrested, is fun. This stuff where the guy's coming out of the pub or whatever it is and getting into a fight and then getting into a fight with Crawler is fun. It shows it's all based upon the stuff to do with him as a character, and not just because, well, we need a gag here for the sake of the tone. With that said, however, going back onto the script, I do like what this volume sets up for coming volumes, or at least into the next volume. I think that making the Delivery Man, the Scarred Man, whichever thing you want to call him, a possible failed successor of O'Clock, or alternatively he's some kind of fanboy that got his power, is a great idea. It gives us more reasons to care who they are, and doesn't just make them kind of your typical aloof villain guy that sits in the shadows and goes,
Yeah, yes, everything's going to plan now. Yeah, I'm going to totally do the bad thing eventually, when the writers eventually figure out a thing for me to do. Yeah.
We don't get anything like that, and yes, I'm still kind of annoyed that they're still playing around with him just farting around the edges and just acting in a way that feels terribly enigmatic, and hopefully we'll get something with him that feels a lot more substantial, and we'll get a greater idea as to who's really calling the shots here. We could probably make a fairly educated guess as to who really is behind this whole Monster Factory thing, but still, it is setting us up that we're actually going to start understanding who the hell the Delivery Man really is. And I will say is I'm really happy that they didn't tease the who O'Clock really is thing too long. They didn't draw it out into, oh, and something we're not going to find out about for another 5 volumes or so. It pretty much just, well, it explicitly says at the end of this volume that Knuckle Duster really is O'Clock. Now, we don't know what the relationship between O'Clock / Knuckle Duster and the Delivery Man really is. We can speculate, but that is something that we'll get to as time goes by, and I like the fact that we can speculate on it. How long we'll have to speculate, we'll soon see, but I do appreciate the fact that, like I say, we're not dragging stuff out for far too long. Of course, this whole entire series only has another 10 or so volumes after this, so I am glad that they aren't leaving this into like the final 2 volumes when they suddenly go, oh my god, you would never guess it, but Knuckle Duster was O'Clock all along! Even though we pretty much exactly said that when it was revealed that the reason why the Delivery Man has a scar on his face is because he's doing in tribute to his mentor, and the only character we've seen with a scar on his face up until this moment was Knuckle Duster. But I'm sure that was total happenstance! Turns out it wasn't! Oh! Glad that isn't the case at all, but whatever. I'm glad that we are doing this in a way that at least feels like there's some kind of sense of idea behind this and not just waiting for time. Though I will just say, is that whilst I do appreciate what we're getting with the coming volume and everything that we're seeing here, I dislike the fact that 2 of our major villains in this series thus far have been connected to Knuckle Duster. B was his daughter. This Delivery Man guy is either a successor, a failed successor, or a fanboy that got his powers as some kind of nod and inversion of what we got with All Might and Midoriya within the main series. I dislike the fact that he is so connected to Knuckle Duster, as it's one of those things where it feels like it makes the universe smaller, and it feels like you're my father's brother's cousin's former roommate kind of a deal, which I don't like. It's that kind of Star Wars narrative incestuousness that I really just detest. And that is something that, hey, it looks like it isn't just the movies that do that, it's also the books and the comic books, because nothing can be original, nothing can stand alone, can it? But anyway, I do appreciate at the very least that whilst I do have my misgivings at the fact we have yet another character connected into all of this, connected into this one character, it is still, by and large, still a very solid start and something we can at least build from and develop from. And it's all presented in such a way that it feels like it's building this world out a lot more. That we can have other great heroes that start from the ones that we've seen from the main series and the ones that have been reintroduced in an earlier point in their career within this particular series. You know, like this feeling of, oh, there were heroes before All Might, there was an industry, there was a legacy here before he came along, it's just that he's the most popular one of this moment, and I really do appreciate that. And something I do like is the fact that this whole criminal conspiracy that we have here feels like it's being done in a way which feels measured and reasonable. This whole mission that we're getting towards the end of this particular volume sees Knuckle Duster go off to Hong Kong to find the source of this new brand of trigger. And I like the fact that there's being this effort to try and make this into this larger thing, this give us this greater sense there being an operation here and there being this greater criminal network that we haven't really seen or had teased to us within the main series itself. Now, there's an understandable reason for that. It's because the main series was never about that, so getting this deeper dive into criminal networks and such isn't really what they do, and the closest thing they've ever really done is the odd tease within the main series with Yakuza gangs and the mafia stuff within the most recent movie. But here there seems to be this greater sense of giving us an idea of there being a bigger operation. Maybe the stuff in Hong Kong is just purely an organisation that just sells this lesser brand of trigger to anybody and everybody that has money for it. Or maybe they are linked up to this big monster factory thing. We don't know, but it at least feels as though with this and the mixer stuff for its sins and the stuff with the distribution network using the crab-based snack company, that there's a greater effort here to create something that feels as though this is a real criminal organisation and they're trying to distribute this stuff as a real criminal organisation would do and does do. How it all hangs together we don't know, but at least there is a greater sense of we are creating a criminal empire here that our heroes have to take down, more so than, oh, the bad guys are making the drugs in the drug factory and now we need to go and stop them doing that because the drug factory is specifically within this one city, and if we take out this specifically one facility, then all the drug will be defeated forever and ever. Winners don't do drugs, kids, and that kind of stuff. No, there is this greater sense of, okay, seemingly it originates in Hong Kong, then it comes to Japan, and then it's distributed via groceries and via these little party things, and that's interesting. Whether or not, again, the stuff in Hong Kong is connected to the big villains in a major way, or it's just somewhere that they go to buy stuff, we'll probably see over the next few volumes, or so at least the next few episodes when we actually get to that. But again, I like the fact there's this greater attempt to make it feel as though there's this world of criminality here that has a mechanical logic to it. Oh sure, it's standard stuff. This is the kind of stuff that you will find in any given crime drama these days, or indeed any given crime drama over the past 40 to 50 years. But at least it feels as though it's there, and at least it feels as though there's a genuine attempt to try and figure this shit out, so it makes it feel more real and lived in, and more concrete and more physical than just, we need to stop the drugs, so let us stop the drugs. But anyway, before we get into our rant about some other issue that I have with broader narratives, let us get into the negatives. Okay, so I've just realised that I've accidentally deleted the script part that I have for negatives, so I'll just have to do this from my head, so forgive me if this feels a little bit waffly, but with that said, this volume, as much as I did enjoy it, does feel as though it's lacking in substance. this particular volume was, again, it is fun. It has these really great creative moments, and I do appreciate the fact that it's trying its best to build up this greater criminal empire thing that our heroes have to try and defeat, and setting up these interesting things for the future and how these characters will react to the news as to who Knuckle Dusty really used to be. There is still this part of me that feels that for the most part it doesn't really feel as though, aside from these individual moments, that not really a whole lot of great substance really did happen. And when that greater substance stuff did happen, it was part of a larger episode, and those larger episodes were so disconnected from one another. So much of this volume was spent with Crawler dealing with some kind of strange monster in the grand scheme of things doesn't really matter to the overall narrative. Oh sure, it does end up playing into this stuff with this lesser form of Trigger and the greater schemes of the Monster Factory or whatever their name is, but the actual meat and potatoes stuff, the kind of stuff that makes people determine whether or not an episode or a given volume is or is not quote-unquote filler, those substantial moments feel fewer and far more between in comparison to, oh look, Crawler's running away from Thomas the Tank Engine, oh look at that, All Might's fighting a giant tofu monster. Again, these episodes, these moments, these wacky silly moments are fun for what they are, but with that said, it feels as though it takes us too long to get to these major moments, and when these major moments do come along, they're very short, or alternatively, it takes almost a quarter of an episode in the following episode to explain them, as was the case with the stuff with the Mexa arc. The whole mechanics of that, the way in which that connected to the wider criminal empire, this wider criminal monster factory thing, wasn't really explained all that well within the 2 episodes that were made up of it, and it needed the final episode to really explore that and discuss that and to try and connect this all together, which for me just isn't good enough. Oh sure, I'll take this mini little lore dump to recontextualize things away from a larger lore dump within the episode itself, which I think would have come out of left field, but it's strange that with that Mixer arc, it feels like just something just totally random, disconnected to anything else. And whilst it is fun to see Midnight actually getting involved with the hero stuff, or rather the hero/vigilante stuff, in a way which feels somewhat logical, and their involvement feels like, oh, of course you'd send a hero like this to deal with something like this. And whilst I do have my misgivings of including major characters on the main series, yes, it still just doesn't really feel as though it works, because we need that recontextualization later on to try and make it seem as though, oh no, this is what was really going on, and we're now using this as a mechanism to set up Knuckle Duster in Hong Kong. When I think about this particular volume and I think about the major moments of it, it only maybe feels as though there's one episode's worth of major genuinely important story content, and everything thereafter, whilst fun and enjoyable, feels rather loose. It feels like a lot of fluff, it feels like a lot of padding, it doesn't really feel that substantial. And it reminds me of those times when you'll see people recommending a TV series or a manga series, an anime or a cartoon, someone will say, oh yeah, it's really great, just skip this episode, skip this episode, skip this episode, skip these 10 episodes, skip these 5 episodes, and then you'll have a great time. And with this particular one, it feels like, okay, skip these 2 episodes, skip half of this episode, skip half of this episode, skip these 2 episodes, and there you've got yourself a great time. Which makes it feel as though this entire thing doesn't really feel as though it's worth the money of entry. It's not worth the entry price, despite the fact there is still some good stuff here, but these major moments that come along, they feel so rare, and everything else just feels as though it's there for the sake of goofing around. It feels as though we're still in the realm of a palate cleanser period, which hopefully won't be the case as we get into the next volume, but we'll have to see. With that said, however, let us get into the overview, and I'd hate to say it, but this for me feels like the weakest volume thus far. I'm not going to say it's a bad volume, because I do think there is good content here, there's good material here, I should say. There are good moments, there are enjoyable moments that are fun, exciting, thrilling, scary, spooky, gross. And in and of themselves, they are great, but they're not really enough to build an entire episode around oftentimes, let alone an entire volume. These stuff, again, with Thomas the Tank Engine head, that's like a quarter of an episode. The stuff with the Mixer stuff, doesn't really feel as though it really goes anywhere, and there's so much wacky stuff with Crawler being oblivious and the silly monster designs. A lot of that stuff is fun, but it barely makes it feel as though the entire volume is worth it, with just those in mind, as they barely are enough to build an entire episode off of. Or when those good moments come, whether they are major story moments or wacky story moments, they come along so rarely or appear so late that it almost undermines what went before it. Or more, that I should really say that as regards the more serious of this stuff with with Knuckle Duster and O'Clock, and the stuff with O'Clock specifically, and the Criminal Empire stuff. That stuff is great, but it's so good that it ends up to a certain degree undermining everything that went before it. Like, who cares if Crawler and Racerhead have to team up to stop the Squid Monster, because this delivery man guy is hinting that he may be connected to some powerful group or individual, and oh hey, forget this crap with the mixers because Knuckle Duster is back and he's about to cause an international incident. And as I say, it feels as though after 9 episodes, it only feels as though there's really 2 of absolute substance, and the rest of it feels largely like filler. Fun filler for what it is, but it doesn't really, it feels terribly directionless. And whilst I am someone who is not as aggressively against filler as many other people, I think it's something that needs to be handed out evenly, and I think it needs to be distributed across a series and a season a lot more evenly. Here it just feels as though there's like 7 episodes that you could honestly skip if you're not into the wackier, sillier stuff, and just only read the 2 episodes that really matter, as everything else just feels kind of lackluster in comparison, as much as I enjoy it. With that said, however, I still think it's a decent volume, and I hope that by the time I get to the end of this series, one way or the other, I just turn around and say, okay, this was just the bad volume, and everything else was good, or everything else was a lot more strong than this, or was a lot better than this, and this was just the brief 3 or 4 episodes in the anime where it was just a little bit lackluster. But we'll soon see about that. With all that said and done, however, let's get into Comment Corner! It's time for Comment Corner, talking about comments from the previous video, which of course was the review of the episode One Outrageous Traveller. It's the one with the Thomas the Tank Guy in it. Ooh, how wacky and raucous and silly that truly was. We kick off our comments by going to Sergeant Gunner, who says, Chris, congrats on almost 150 subs. Wish you all the best in 2025. Thank you, and I wish you all the best as well. It would be really great if by the end of the year I could get to 150. At this point, I'll be just happy with 140. To be fair though, last year I said, oh, it wouldn't be great if I hit 130, and I did, so maybe I should be a little bit more ambitious than that, but I've got a feeling that if I sit here and go, oh, let's get to 1,000, I'm not going to get to 1,000, and I'll look a bit of a tit when I don't. But anyway, we'll see where all that goes. 140 would be fine, 150 would be better, 1 billion would be the bestest thing in the world. Let's reach for the stars. Never going to happen. But anyway, we now move on to Big X1, who says, this one was weird, but I think it got better towards the end, and I agree. I think the episode itself was, well, I think it was just, it suffers the same problem that a lot of the episodes of this volume have, where it feels kind of directionless for the first half, but then when it actually gets into something more substantial, it's only in the second half, and it only feels like the final couple pages are actually anything of substance, which we'll soon see where this substance is going to go into the next volume, though it has just sprang in the back of my mind that I need to order the next couple volumes. By my calculations, by the time I finish the 8th volume, we should be just ready for the new series to kick off. Give or take a couple weeks with, the reviews of the volumes, and maybe a couple things to fill the gap. Maybe I'll do a little bit of video for people to give them an idea as to what to expect from Vigilantes as a anime series. Because it's a little bit different to My Hero Academia. Some ways better, some ways less so, but that's a discussion we'll have closer to the time. Anyway, thank you all for listening, thank you all for watching. Let me know what you thought about this particular volume in the comment section down below, and see you next time. Goodbye!
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!